Brian Holler here, New Hope Community Church pastor here in Cincinnati, Ohio. And we're going to delve into Genesis chapter 3. And there's so much here. We're probably going to have to do this in 2, maybe 3 parts. And so I want to dig in and just see some of the fascinating and beautiful things that are in here. And actually, some of them are heartbreaking. So let's start. Genesis chapter 3, verse 1 says, Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. Let's stop for a second and recognize that we're talking about the serpent. Hasn't come up before. Don't know who the serpent is. And in fact, we all in today's world assume that the serpent is Satan, is the devil. But nowhere in this chapter does it tell us that. In fact, nowhere in the Bible does it tell us that until we get all the way to the very last part of the Bible in the book of Revelation, when it is talking about Satan, and it refers to him as that serpent of old. And so we have this serpent showing up, and he says to the woman, Indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? The woman said to the serpent, Well, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, You shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die. Now, let me go back just a second here, and let's actually take a look and see what did God really say, because it says here that God says, God commanded, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. Doesn't say anything about touching it. For on the day that you eat from it, you will surely die. So first of all, God is being misquoted here. Second thing is, then the next line in Genesis 2 is God said, it's not good for man to be alone. He said this statement to Adam, not to Eve. Eve hadn't even been created yet, taken from Adam's side yet. So this statement was made to Adam. So when we get into Genesis chapter 3, and the serpent is talking to the woman has been kind of brought up to speed by Adam. So Adam may have begun to add prohibitions that God never stated, and the idea of you can't touch it either. So regardless, Satan shows up. And when she says, well, we can't eat from it, the serpent said to the woman, you surely will not die. So he's placing doubt into her mind. For God knows that in the day that you eat from it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God, knowing good from evil. Now, there's a big debate about where did evil come from, who created it, and you may or may not have heard the explanation before, but evil falls in the same category as darkness and falls in the same category as cold. Darkness and cold are not things that exist. They are only a definition or a word for something that has an absence. And so darkness is only an absence of light. Light is an actual thing. Darkness is just the absence of a thing. Same with cold. Cold is simply the absence of heat. If you have no heat there, then you have cold, that is the void that is ushered in. Darkness is a void of light. Cold is a void of heat. And so when you begin to speak about good and evil, evil is simply a void of good. And the statement here of knowing, it's a Hebrew word yada. It means that God doesn't want you to know, yada, be intimate with, have an intimate knowledge of evil. It's the same word. It's when Adam knew Eve, she conceived and had a son. There's an intimate knowledge there, and God's saying, I don't want you to have that intimate knowledge of evil. But Satan plays this out as if you're being deprived of something if you don't know that. So the woman saw that the tree was good for the food, and that it was delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise. She took from its fruit, and she ate. So Satan is basically saying, or the serpent here is basically stating that, God says you can't have it all, but you deserve it all. You should be able to have it all. And she sees that it's good with her eyes, and it's desirable, and so she decides to then take and eat. Now, if you're familiar with typical general theology, the initial sin, the original sin, is blamed on Adam and not Eve. Why is it, if it's the woman who's taken the fruit and eaten it, that Adam gets blamed? Well, we see here she gave also to her husband who was with her, and he ate. So Satan uses this desire of man to not be alone, and he uses it to his advantage. He uses it that rather than for the man to stand up and potentially break relationship in order to avoid sin, he goes along with it. And I think just that simple statement there, I think we've all experienced that in our life and seen that happen. So it says, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made for themselves loin coverings. So this whole first paragraph here in chapter 3 is so profound, because it's basically making a statement that when they decided that they wanted to know evil, they wanted to yada, they wanted to experience it, that they created a void. Blaise Pascal was the first person who said that we all have a God-shaped hole in us, a God-shaped void in us. And so our desire is always to try to fill that void with something. We might do it with alcohol. We might do it with food. We might do it with drugs. We might do it with sex. We might do it with work. We might do it with all kinds of things. But it's never going to be able to fill that void, because only God can fill that void. We see that here, and that the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. So they now begin to see and judge one another, and they become very self-aware. And I think it's just, we've all experienced this. We feel vulnerable. We feel exposed in life. And so we spend our lives sewing together fig leaves and trying to hide ourselves. We hide ourselves with titles. We hide ourselves with, again, our jobs. We hide from the world with substances. We hide from the world by just going into our homes and closing the doors. We live in a society today where we can sit in front of a TV and we don't need to worry about knowing anyone. This is all a result of sin. And so I want to go ahead and stop there for today, because while this is the problem, and we'll see some of the results of the problem, we're also going to see an introduction to the solution to the problem as we dig further. Hope you have a great week, and hope to see you next time.